One, first of all, I just simply, I am speechless. I have followed your work. I've read your book. I hope I can get this coming out without breaking into tears. This is an absolutely amazing experience this afternoon. But what I want to do here, because we have at our advantage, I've been live tweeting your remarks, and we have this technology at our disposal, and it's so useful to see how it works for us. Now, I want to read to you a retweet, and I read this retweet not to be inflammatory in the least, but I think this is indicative of what you, one of the things, or of the many things you've said.
Professor McDowell, move the microphone a little closer to
Oh,
your mouth.
okay, so, okay, I was trying to find this retweet. Okay, yes, here it is. Of course, I think I have captured the essence of your remarks. I don't want to either misrepresent or inflame. So blacks, the indigenous immigrants, own this nation. I think I rendered that accurately, made this country, to which I receive, I tweet on behalf of an institute that I run. I don't have a personal Twitter account. The person who is a faculty member at UVA responds, and Miller Center retweeted this. Is this a newly political institute at UVA? This is precisely the kind of issues that if we cannot have a conversation, if I cannot retweet accurately what you have rendered without inviting the charge of politics. What is not political? Is this tweet not political? Again, I do not mean to make this statement to be inflammatory, but rather to suggest you're absolutely right. The distance we have to travel in this country to engage in anything approaching mass incarceration or criminal justice reform is really captured here. If we cannot, on a rainy Saturday afternoon, have a conversation with something as innocuous as this tweet. Thank you very, very much. And I'm going to have to exit with this little one here who's running out of steam. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
you.
you.
I just, just to comment on that, I mean, one of the reasons why I'm increasingly trying to invoke this collective ownership, because we've always been the other. But I would say to the person who's raised it, who is not an immigrant in this country? Who are the non-immigrants? But somehow we have this notion that certain people, once they are born here and their children are born here, they are 100% American. But we're not extending that same analysis to other people just based on where they came from. And that's the kind of I think the racialized kind of blindness that we have accepted, is that we actually don't think critically about this stuff. And when I talk about I just said something similar, and I got a very strong pushback when I talked about us being post-genocidal, because we know the word genocide is bad, but when you think about 10 million indigenous people living on this continent before white settlers, all dying from famine and disease and drug, what else would you call it? Remember, the advanced placement test got in trouble for using the word genocide to characterize the plight of indigenous people. People just went crazy. We know the word is bad, but we're not worried about the conduct that supports the word. We're just worried about the label. And so what people are objecting to is this word own, because you can own your land, you can own these things, but when we start saying, no, wait a minute, I'm as American as anyone. I'm not going to give you my American identity and status just because my skin is brown. Because, I actually think I'm closer to the original Americans than anybody else, right? So there's all of that. So I do think it's that narrative shift that is so urgent and so important. The reason why we're calling lynching terrorism is because without that phrase, we miss the hardship that was created by that. The reason why our next report on the civil rights era is going to really focus on resistance to civil rights is because it's going to be labeled segregation forever. Right? I want to focus on all of that rhetoric and what it means. And I think one of the challenges we face is that I think too many poor people, people of color, they always bear the burden of proving racial animus and bias. When you look at our history and you look at that era of segregation forever, I don't know why the burden isn't flipped. I think if you've been going around for decades saying segregation forever, you bear the burden of proving that that's not where we are today. And that just to me is key for how we move forward.
And also, for the record, for anyone who's unfamiliar with the etiquette of Twitter, a retweet is not an endorsement of the idea. It's simply saying, here's something that would be interesting for anybody out there to contemplate. So.
But endorse that. Endorse that. Let the Miller Center be perceived as a place in which such exchange is inappropriate.
Oh yeah, but it's crazy to say that. I mean, anything that's said at this table to say that that's something that shouldn't be offered. The whole point of this is to offer up whatever your ideas are for people to have a reaction to and to contemplate.
I remember reading a lot about this subject, and one of the things that struck me was a comment from a young single mom in the inner city who said, "I can do everything in the world that's right to bring up my son, but as soon as he steps out the door, he's in another world." You must have a lot of thoughts beyond legalizing possession of drugs as to how we can reduce the rate of violent crime, which is a big issue there.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I do. I mean, I really think that one of our greatest challenges is now dealing with an epidemic of trauma. We have thousands. We can pick. I can identify the 100 zip codes that are going to produce a vastly disproportionate percentage of the people who end up in jails and prisons who engage in crime and criminality, either as victims or as offenders. I know the zip codes. We all know them. And I can tell you what's going on in those communities that creates that problem. You have children born to violent families, people always hating each other, screaming and shouting. They live in violent neighborhoods, they go to violent schools, and by the time they're 5, they are suffering from a trauma disorder. So the short version is, if somebody came in here with a gun and said, "I'm going to kill everybody," every one of us, our brains would start producing cortisol and adrenaline, these chemicals that help us cope with stress. And if we got rid of that threat and we're healthy, the brain would shut that down and we'd go on. If you stay in a stressful environment all the time, like our combat veterans, the brain gets tricked into thinking, I got to keep producing this all the time. So that when those young men and women come back home, that stuff is still flowing through their mind and they're overreacting to things that aren't threatening and their behaviors are inappropriate. We call that post-traumatic stress disorder. The treatment for that is to create a relationship with that person where they begin to feel safe. And if we can extend that period of safety from 1 hour to 2 hours to 3 hours, the brain starts, oh, wait a minute, I don't need to produce these chemicals, and then they get better. We need to do that in these zip codes for all of these children. Instead of meeting them at the school with uniformed police officers and principals who talk like prison wardens and teachers who talk like correctional officers, we need to be meeting them with healthcare workers and counselors and people who say, finally you are here. Let me hold you and make sure you know you are safe with me. I want you to know I'm going to take care of you. I want you to know that you are beautiful and healthy. And I'm going to make that my primary goal for that school, even beyond reading and writing. And if we had that intervention, trauma intervention in those zip codes, we'd see some radical changes in the behaviors of those young people, even if we can't change their home environments. Bruce Perry is doing some amazing work in Chicago with these interventions around trauma care for families and young kids. And the data that he's producing about the success of these kids, it's just phenomenal, at a fraction of what it would cost to put these kids in juvenile detention facilities. So yes, I think that CDC should declare a health crisis in these zip codes. And I think we should flood those zip codes with the resources needed to involve caregivers. I think just like in the law, we have this pro bono tradition of lawyers providing, I think the medical schools and the health schools should be insisting that its students learn trauma care and then donate that trauma care in these kinds of neighborhoods. I think that even ordinary folks can play a role in creating that sense of safety. And that would, for me, be an essential ingredient of how we turn the corner on preventing some of the violence that we're so bad at punishing. And if we did that, and then we changed the culture of education. I mean, I've been saying to the education department, you need to change these metrics, because the things that they don't measure when they're trying to evaluate whether a school is good or not is suspension rate and expulsion rates. And my view is if you're a school with a high suspension rate or high expulsion rate, you're not a good school. And some of those schools that have raced to the top to get the big awards, they have unbelievably high suspension and expulsion rates. They're basically throwing away the kids that aren't ready enough to take advantage of the mediocre education that these folks are providing. And that's how they get from mediocrity to something better. And I just think that if we made that part of the calculus, all of a sudden, those schools would have to start learning about trauma. They'd have to start learning about program interventions that help at-risk kids. They'd start doing the things that schools have abandoned doing in the last 30 years to help those most vulnerable. Because the kids that need education the most are not the kids who are the children of professionals or even the children of the working class. The kids who need education the most are the children of people who are drug addicted, the children of people who are incarcerated, the children of people who don't give them love and attention. Education is the only thing that's going to get them out of that situation. And those are the very kids we throw away the instant that they manifest some of the problems that have created them. You're welcome.
Another question? Well, I'm going to seize on that silence so
Yes.
we can set you free.
Yes,
Thank you
good.
again.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.